we have reserved some seats here for the industry, so if you can sit at front. And all the others that are at the back, please come closer so we can see your faces, get the microphone easily. Yeah, they don't pay attention to me, just like my children. That's great. Thank you. I'm used to it anyway. Sí, por favor, si se sientan más adelante, la gente de la industria especialmente, que queremos escucharlos. Which language do you want now? Okay. Okay, just before we start, we wanted to acknowledge all the issues that are going on here in Spain, the floods in Valencia. There have been a great number of victims, and the country is mourning for 3 days. So I would give like a minute of silence just to accompany the country that is hosting us today in this very difficult moment. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our GFRA EU FMD Forum. This is something we put together with the people from EU FMD, and it's the very first time this is being done, so it's kind of an experiment that we are all through. Try to come as close as possible. Alejandra, you come. We need you at the front. So we have seats here for the industry as well. We have said that several times that are reserved, and the whole idea is to discuss on those topics, but I'm going to introduce you a little bit the GFRA. So today the theme is advancing FMD control through collaborative research and regulatory synergy. So we want to discuss how we can put together and merge what we are doing as researchers with what is being required by the regulations, and how we can adapt to each other to make every scientific advance or every new product, every new tool get to the market. So this is who we are, the GFRA. I'm quite sure you already know us. We are a global community. So we are an alliance of scientists that produce evidence and innovation with the goal of getting a progressive control and eradication of FMD that is very close to also to the mission of the EU FMD. And we work through partnership. So for us, it's very important, the networking, the partners, and we have several members, and members are organizations, research organizations, universities, academy, and any of your institutions can be a member as well. And we have several activities. I just highlighted the 4 more important ones. So we have the annual scientific meetings. We are having one next year. So this is not our scientific meeting. This is our forum together with the UFMD. But we used to have our scientific meetings. We also do the research gap analysis every 4 years, I think, where we revise all that is being done, what has been published, and what is still missing. Taking pictures. We also have webinars, regular webinars that I'm pretty sure you have been at, or you have seen some of them. If you don't, you can go to our webpage and you will find the link to the YouTube of our webinars. And we have a newsletter that I hope you read, usually, where we showcase all our activities. These are the most important, but we have had some small grants for low middle income countries. And well, of course, we help supporting people from low middle income countries coming to this kind of conferences. And we are a really active group. And there we are. So this is the GFRA Executive Committee. Well, Frank is not here. He's our president from Uganda. But but you have seen the others. Many of them are around here. So you already know Anna, Michael, Toby is here, Mariano, Nahendra, Giselle, and Melanie. So most of them are here. Fedra couldn't be here today. But this is the group that is behind all these activities, but just as an executive committee representing all the members. So for today's forum, we want to have a friendly, relaxed space where we can share our insights, our ideas, and it should be relaxed. The first part, it will be like a transition from what we have been doing the days before to what we want to achieve in the afternoon. So the first part will be, we will have more talks because we want to set up the environment, what's going on in the world. We are global. But the idea is to have short presentations that should only trigger discussion. And the panelists, of course, will help with the discussion. We want to know your insights, and as it says there, and I said yesterday, we will speak English, but if you want to say something and you don't feel comfortable in English, there's always someone else in a global community to help. So please speak up. So this is our agenda. We're going to start this morning with why we should control FMD. We have two moderators that are not members of the executive committee, but are members of the UFMD, and Georgina, she's from Perbright, that is a member institution. We have FMD control using improved diagnostics. We will go back to the vaccines that the discussion started in the session I co-chaired with Chuck. But we need to discuss more about vaccines, and I think the questions on regulations came up the other day, and we say, okay, stop. We're going to discuss that at the GFRA Forum. So that's today. And of course, if you stay through the whole day, we have a very nice cocktail for all of you to enjoy and to say goodbye. We are very grateful to our sponsors, Boehringer Ingelheim, MSD, Biogenesis Vago, and CDB. We have two companies from Argentina sponsoring us. That is very nice. And please follow us in social media. So we have just launched our LinkedIn account. The LinkedIn account is on the name of our group, so it's not difficult to find. And just if you have your phones and you can follow us, we want to get 100 followers today from you. And you can follow me as well, with my name and last name there. But it's very important to follow, because there we post everything. It's quite new, the LinkedIn account, but the idea also for young people who want to know about opportunities, not only with us, but with other institutions or groups, the webinars, everything is posted there, even our nice pictures as well. So that said, I'm gonna move to the first part. Why should we control FMD? And I leave the floor to my colleagues. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Georgina Limon. As Alejandra said, me and Tibiaco are sharing the first session. Is why should we control FMD, or should we control FMD? Some of us that were in the workshop yesterday started the discussion. We know it's different opinion, different incentive, different barriers to control it. So the idea of this session is to get an idea from different views, from different regions in the world, and see what is happening around and what is the views of different people. And as Alejandra said, we encourage everybody to go in the discussion That's the idea of this, have the different opinions and different challenges, stories, whatever you want to share with us. So we start with the presentations. Each of the presentations will set the scene from different parts of the world, and each of them with different situations in the FMD control, and then we start with the discussion. So I'll invite our first speaker, Melissa.
Thank you, Georgina and Alejandra and everybody. Good morning. My name is Melissa McLaws, and it's my pleasure and honor really to be here today and to get a chance to speak to all of you about this very, I think, interesting topic. So why should we control FMD? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the cost and benefit of FMD control from different perspectives. So this presentation was prepared by me, but it was informed by discussions with a lot of colleagues from FAO and EU FMD. There's some names there, but it's not inclusive. There's other colleagues here today who I've had many discussions with over the years, as well as the leading researchers in the field. And then that includes Theo Knight-Jones, Brian Perry, Jonathan Rushton, and you'll see them mentioned in this short talk, as well as many, many others. So I'd like to start out with this impact framework that's not FMD specific. It's about a livestock disease. And it was developed first by Jonathan Rushton quite a long time ago, and then adapted by Theo and Jonathan towards FMD. And then we've expanded it a little bit more in some recent guidelines on economic impact that are going to be coming out from FAO shortly. So you'll see the first branching is between direct and indirect impacts. And direct impacts in this sense are meant to be those that occur as an immediate impact of the disease process, whereas the indirect impacts are more results of the human intervention for either to prevent or to control disease, as well as secondary impacts flowing from the reduced production. So these ones here, the visible losses, production losses, mortality, as well as the denied access to trade, those are some of the ones that we most frequently discuss. When we look at the control costs, these are ones that are fairly easily measured, and there's actually tools available that can help you to measure that, like outcost. And then there's other ones that we discuss a little bit less often and maybe haven't been measured very often either. So animal welfare on one side as a direct impact, environmental considerations, pollution another, also livelihood and food security impacts. So these ones are more difficult to quantify and measured less often. So now if we want to talk about the benefits of control, that just represents the flip side of the impact. So there's going to be fewer impacts because now you're adding control in. So there's factors that contribute to where this benefit cost scale tips, depending on how you weigh the costs and benefits, and especially considering the perspective that you might have. So whether you're considering the global level, a national level, whether you're interested in a particular sector, or if you're looking at the level of a value chain actor such as a livestock producer. And then within those different groups, there's also different perspectives. So whether it's a free country, endemic country, and what particular sector you're dealing with, as well as the modality of production, whether it's intensive, extensive, the size of your herd and whatnot. So looking first at global level, sorry, I'm trying to do two things here because I was worried I wouldn't be able to see the screen, so I brought my computer up, and then so that makes it even harder. So looking first at the global level. This paper was produced in 2013 by Thea Knight-Jones and Jonathan Rushton, and this paper is still frequently referred to when we want to talk about the impacts of FMD. So they really emphasized the magnitude of the impact is related to the huge number of animals that are infected every year. So they estimated about 2% of the world's cattle population has FMD on an annual basis. And 32 million livestock units might be affected by FMD in a year. And that could go up to as many as 79 million. And a livestock unit is 1 cow, slightly more than 3 pigs, or 10 sheep and goats. The majority of that impact is happening in China, India, and Africa, and that's probably still true, although we've heard that there's a lot of control efforts going on in some of those regions, so maybe it's changed over the 10 years. But it's related to where those animals are, and you can see in the map, the huge numbers of animals in China and India, and then the level of disease in Africa might also contribute to that measurement. So in that paper, and this is often quoted, that the annual impact of FMD ranges from 6.5 up to 21 billion US dollars. And I think it's really important to emphasize that this is only those visible production losses and the vaccination in endemic regions. So that's not considering all of those other measures, such as the impacts on welfare, the environment, livelihoods, as well as other costs that weren't included there. So moving now to the national level, first of all, looking at free countries, you can see that, again, the perspective matters. If you're a free country, there's different considerations, whether you have a limited import or export market, or whether you're really an importer of most livestock products. FMD outbreaks do happen quite regularly in usually free countries. And again, in that same paper, that they estimated that the costs from 1998 to 2013 in free countries were over $20 billion. And generally speaking, the indirect costs are much greater than the direct costs when you're looking at national level. So for those countries that are exporting countries, that's going to relate largely to market access, whereas for net importers, it might be related to the cost of control. But it's important to realize that even outside of incursions, FMD is still having a big impact on countries related to the ongoing prevention and control. So countries that are at a high risk of incursion might continue to vaccinate, and we're going to hear about the situation in South America today, which might address some of those considerations. And then countries that are free and want to maintain their free status, but are net importing countries, they still have to pay a premium price to import from other free countries. So that's also considered a cost. When we move to endemic countries, the situation is a little bit different in that we have a little bit of an evidence gap in terms of the net impact, especially when we're looking at the indirect impacts. It's well recognized that for these countries to attain the free status, that there's going to be a high cost. And that might be worthwhile for some countries, especially if they have the potential for market access. But then even those countries might run into other barriers unrelated to FMD, whether it's other diseases or standards that their potential trading partners are going to hold them to. Within these endemic countries, again, the impact is going to vary according to the sector and the production type. And it's also important to recognize that not just FMD has an impact in these countries, but also the control measures. Things like closing markets can have an impact on livelihoods, and there's also impacts through, building fences on the environment and on wildlife habitats. Now moving to livestock owners, these individuals in the value chain are generally most impacted by production losses. Dairy and pig producers are usually the worst impacted, with less impacts in the beef sector, and especially in small ruminants, it's often less severe. Commercial, 1 minute? Okay. I'll go very quickly. Commercial animals are more intensively managed, and they can have high levels of production and so be under stress. And then these impacts on individual producers also depend on the time scale that's considered. So there can be the impact can happen over a long term due to changes in the herd structure, increases in the age of first calving, reduced conception rates, and those can take up to 6 years to manifest in one study in beef herds. So that's important to recognize. Moving along, cost-benefit analyses. I'll go very quickly through this, but again, it depends very much on the perspective that you're looking at. So these are different studies at farm level and looking at zones in different countries. And you can see that the cost-benefit ratios measured are very different. And that can be different because of the methodology that was used, and also, of course, the perspective that's been addressed. So when we're looking at who should pay for FMD control, who's going to bear the costs and reap the benefits, I think it's important to realize that that can change as a country is progressing along control. And in stages, PCP stages 2, when you're really focusing on managing the impact of the disease, it's likely that a few individuals or individual producers are going to benefit the most, and so perhaps they should pay. But as you're moving up in control and it becomes more like a public good, then the public sector might have to bear more of those costs. Finally, the cost of the importance of FMD compared to other diseases. FMD is often a priority disease, but it's not clear whether or not the resourcing reflects, this apparent priority of FMD. And GBADS has recently, they've come up with a structure to help us to have a way to consistently compare the disease impacts across disease. And this is an example of the animal health loss envelope in Ethiopia, and that yellow circle shows you the costs related to FMD. And then in conclusion so I hope I've shown you that the key FMD impacts are going to vary according to perspective, that we've measured a long time ago the direct costs and the vaccine costs. There's several costs that I'm not aware that have been measured, especially related to the environmental costs and the AMR costs. And this comes back to Madur's presentation from the first day about whether or not FMD control can be better integrated into current priorities, keeping in mind, again, this massive number of animals infected. And so if you multiply the antibiotic use to treat those cases or to manage secondary infections, as well as the inefficiencies in production, I think FMD control has the potential to contribute to those global agendas. And now I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa, for a really comprehensive introduction. Our next speaker is Simon Digmu, which couldn't make it to the conference, but he sent a recording presentation. So. And that's about the scenarios in Africa.
Yeah. Good morning or good evening. This is Dr. Simon Digmu Jumbo. I used to work for Lanavet in Cameroon, but now I'm working with FAO. And what I'm presenting here doesn't reflect the ideas of FAO. It's my ideas, and I just want to clarify that I was not able to go for the open session in Spain due to visa problems. I just have a short presentation that I want to make. concerning the call for more research on the economic impact of foot and mouth disease in Africa. The outline of my presentation will look like this. We would look at the introduction, then we'll look at the justification and why do we have to do more research on economic impact in Africa, and the suggested ways of control of foot and mouth disease in Africa, and the conclusions. As a way of introduction, foot and mouth disease, as we all know, is a threat to livestock industries in many countries worldwide due to extraordinary contagiousness and the fact that it precludes international trade of livestock and its products. It is one of the most important economic diseases of even-toothed animals in the tropics. An example of high economic losses due to foot and mouth disease can be illustrated by the devastating 2001 FMD epidemic in the United Kingdom that cost almost 3.1 billion pounds sterling. In Uganda, the government spent 5.3 million pounds sterling and 7.5 million pounds sterling between 2007 and 2009 to control FMD. In Cameroon, my country, the study was carried out and it was shown that an average economic loss of 164,100 francs CFA was lost in cattle, and it was reported in the northern regions of Cameroon. Justification of why do we have to carry out more research on economic impact? In Africa, 75% of animals are raised on a communal basis as smallholders, which sustain the livelihood of the vulnerable group, that's the women and children. And the transboundary animal disease, just like foot and mouth disease, negatively impact this vulnerable group. And in Africa, most of the transboundary animal diseases have high mortality and high morbidity. For example, we have PPR, a contagious bovine pneumonia, and African swine fever. The government of Africa, most governments in Africa give priority to diseases of humans, like malaria, HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, etc. In Africa, Africa is plagued by wars and political crises, and some more attention and resources are given to these sectors. So zoonosis and transboundary animal control, the animal sector, they give more priority, decision makers in the animal sector, they give more priorities to zoonosis and transboundary animals that have high mortality, and less attention is given to foot and mouth disease. Because for foot and mouth disease, it's true that the mobility is high, but the mortality is low. So most African countries have porous borders. So whatever you do in your own country and your neighbor is not doing the same thing, you are practically wasting your time and energy and resources. Meaning that if you carry out control measures in your country, and a neighboring country is not carrying out control measure, vaccination, and so on, the probability of the disease leaving your country to another, leaving the country that's not vaccinated, not control, is very high, because there are limited control of livestock movement within and between countries. And so thus easy disease transmission and propagation within and between countries. So, what are the suggested ways of control of foot and mouth disease in Africa? I'm suggesting that more research on the economic impact of foot and mouth disease be carried out. And because we've carried out research on foot and mouth disease, and the governments, they see the amount of money or resources that they're losing because of foot and mouth disease. As we all know that when you have foot and mouth disease in your country, you cannot export animal products. So if the government, they realize that they're losing a lot due to foot and mouth disease, I think they'll pay more attention. So if we carry out more research on foot and mouth disease, and then we do a lot of advocacy to the government and partners, I think that this will help to go a long way here, and making decision makers in Africa to consider foot and mouth disease, give it a priority. Another way of controlling foot-and-mouth disease in Africa, I think regional vaccinations and control programs is involving so many countries at the same time and period. I think we learned this from the control eradication of rinderpest. In fact, I was opportune to have taken part in the eradication process in Cameroon. And I remember in those days there were projects, regional projects like GFRA 15. There was PAC, there was SPACE that helped eradicated rinderpest. So we can, tap from this experience and, do the same thing for foot-and-mouth disease, and I think it will go a long way to help. The Dr. Mapese Neo came to Liberia, and I talked about this to him, and he was very enthusiastic. Neo is the co-chair of the GFRA for foot-and-mouth disease. And he was saying that since Africa has about 3 labs that produce vaccines against foot-and-mouth, and if they produce vaccines in large quantity, that will bring down the price. And so many countries can buy the vaccines and vaccinate. So another suggested way of controlling foot-and-mouth disease in Africa is stricter control of livestock movement within and between countries. So as a way of concluding, the ultimate aim of scientists in the world is to contribute in the eradication of foot-and-mouth disease. I'm talking about scientists that work on foot-and-mouth disease. So as I said, more research on the economic impact of the disease is needed. So, and together with, adequate advocacy to the government and partners, this will help decision makers and policy makers to, prioritize foot-and-mouth disease. So, FMD will be given the right priority as far as disease control and eradication is concerned. And of course, we know that when we control and eradicate foot-and-mouth disease, this will lead to, increase in income and revenue for the vulnerable group, that's the women and children. Thank you very much.
Let's thank Simon. I'm Svetko Alexandru from FMD, and now we move to South America from the transition from free with vaccination to free without vaccination. It's my great pleasure to invite the next speaker, Mariano Perez Filgueira. Mariano, more than welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everyone. For those who does not know me, my name is Mariano Perez Filgueira. I work in Argentina in the National Institute of Agricultural Technology. I don't know how to change this, okay? We work on immunology in vaccines, but today we are going to show some diving in uncharted waters. That is the transition to the free with vaccination to free without vaccination in South America. So, of course, you are aware of this picture. This is from last June, and you can see that there is a lot of green. That means free of FMD, with some regions with vaccination and some others without vaccination. This is more or less the distribution of... there's a pointer there? Here? No. Where? Here? Oh, no. I kill it. Okay. Which one? I'm sorry. No. Here we don't. Okay. No. Okay. It doesn't matter. Here I just want to highlight that the proportion in this situation is like around 80% of a cattle and buffalo population is vaccinated in this picture. Okay. So this is more or less the progression. This is taken from Emilio Leon's presentation a few months ago. It's a little bit modified, but this is the sequence of the outbreaks in the 21st century in South America. I just added the serotypes of virus responsible for the outbreaks. As you can see, many of them are from the O serotype. But you can see that every once in a while there are outbreaks that were preceded by times of peace. But for example, in Colombia or Paraguay in 2011 or Colombia 2018. There are the example of Brazil in 2004 and 5 is the C serotype. That was the last outbreak of a disease in the Amazonia. And as you can see, this is getting greener, okay? So this is more or less the same picture of a successful story. The progression between the first and the two, there are like 20 years, and then 10 years later, most of the continent is green. Let's see, what are the key factors? This is an interpretation, a personal interpretation, but basically, to me, first, the vaccination plans that are mandatory, they are systematic, tightly controlled by the government sanitary authorities. Of course, the tool, the vaccine. South America has been using high-quality vaccines. I am familiar with the example of Argentina. I know that vaccines are tightly controlled by the sanitary authority. They provide the virus to produce them. The formulation is a single oil emulsion and is tested by all the new series. Batches are, the registered vaccines are tested in vivo after a single dose, 90 days, 3 months after that dose. They have to have 75% of animals that show no symptoms of a disease after the intradermolingual injection. So these are purified vaccines. They are DIVA compatible, so you can differentiate infected and vaccinated. And that's an excellent tool in terms of what is that we're using to immunize the animals. Of course, the diagnostics that have been improved that allowed to produce high throughput techniques to measure herd immunity and also to test the virus circulation. Here, at the left of the slide, you can see the number of tests that have been carried out in 2022 and 2023. This is from Panaftosa. I don't know if there is something that rings a bell to you there. Okay. The epidemiological monitoring, of course, implies the animals vaccinated that are over 300 million doses in 2003, and of course, the early detection and disease alert system. So this is what is going on now. The subcontinent is moving towards free without vaccination status in a lot of areas in Brazil and Bolivia. See, you can see those yellow areas. Brazil still holds a small region and close to the Atlantic Ocean that is free with vaccination, but this has been happening since the beginning of the year. Okay, they have suspended the vaccination campaigns in most of the region of Brazil and Bolivia. What does this imply is that, as you can see, in 2003, the amount of animals with vaccination was around 80%, and now this will reverse to 67% of animals without vaccination. So in this context, the strategies of the countries are not the same. First, let's take a view to the global exports. As you can see, all the Mercosur countries, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, they account for around 45% of the global meat exports. and they represent around the 20% of the global production. But while Brazil suspended the vaccination in most of the countries, the idea is to gain access to markets from countries free without vaccination, I think. Uruguay and Argentina continue the vaccination campaigns. That will allow, as a consequence, they will have a reduced access to some markets. However, Uruguay in the last years has increased their meat exports while maintaining vaccination. And that includes, for example, tongue to Japan. Remember that tongue we used to, that was a source of tissue to produce FMD virus So far, Brazil continues with the vaccination campaigns, but we don't know. That's why it's in a different color. So what's next? I just put some questions there that we can address later on, but local vaccine production, to me it seemed that it was really a plus in many ways to produce locally good quality vaccines as a way to control the disease. What are the main risks of introductions? There will be exotic strains, South American strains. That has to be accounted if you want to do some kind of risk analysis. How is the region prepared for potential reemergence of FMD? And that also implies if there will be manufacturers to produce the vaccines. Now I understand that Brazil is not producing, I don't know, is Brazil producing vaccines right now? No. And what is the impact of Venezuela with unknown status, and the potential regulation of World Health Animal Organization will move to this free without vaccination equal to free with vaccination or not? Is it useful? No? Okay. Those are the questions, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mariano, and we can address these questions during the discussion. Now we go to FMD free areas and Europe, and the next speaker is Audu Decker. I'm sure he can make it within 8-9 minutes.
Okay. Very difficult question, I thought, because we're not thinking about foot-and-mouth disease. I am, but I think that I'm the only one in our country, and that most people, they just forgot about FMD. So if you look at the history of FMD, FMD was the first virus ever discovered. And that's for a reason, because it has a huge economic impact on milk production. So farmers in Europe, and mainly in Germany, they pushed the government, now we have new techniques we discovered bacteria, and now we also have to look for the cause of foot-and-mouth disease, because then perhaps we can control it. And that's the only reason that it was one of the first viruses discovered, is because of the economic impact. Otherwise, people would not have invested in that. And that's very important to realize. We are nowadays mostly talking about blocking trade, because that's for free countries, of course. The moment we have an introduction, our trade is blocked. But in the past, reduction in production was really a huge, the greatest impact. And then you should still realize that limited growth in meat industry is not a big impact. Dying of pigs, of course, is an issue, but outbreaks in pigs were not that common in Europe. So dairy industry, that was the main production losses. If you then look at what are the advantages of free trade in Europe, and we have free trade because we have FMD free, that is, for instance, for the Netherlands, we export 60 to 80% of agricultural products we produce. So it's not, we're producing it not for our own people, but a lot of products. We don't have trade restrictions within the EU. That's easy. We have free borders, although some of the borders are now controlled again. We have also free trade with other European countries. Most European countries are within the EU, but for instance, bacon to the United Kingdom is an important part of our export. But when we slaughter an animal, there are a lot of things we do not eat in Europe. Byproducts, feet, ears, the heads, things like that. And these products are sold to countries outside Europe. So being able to sell that outside Europe, it's still a quite a large amount of the profit a farmer makes. So if you look at what a farmer makes, is 30 to 85 euros on a carcass. So that is the feed costs. So what he gets from the pig minus the feed costs, and then for that he has to pay his mortgage, his electricity, his everything, his salary. So if he loses 6 euros only from that income, that's a huge losses. So, but then, yeah, you can say that's important. But if you look at our society, we have different perspectives in society. Oh, why is it changing? Probably something I didn't do myself. Veterinary officials, they think it's important to control FMD. So we are quite strict when we have an outbreak. We think, oh, we can slaughter all the animals in the neighborhood. And yeah. But farmers, yeah, on one hand, they are very interested to be free, and but the moment we try to had strict control measures, some of the farmers didn't agree, so it was not so easy. The agro industry, so the people who make most of the money are not the farmers but the traders. They want to be free, and they think, oh, well, strict regulations are important, but the public also has an opinion. Why do we have to kill all those animals if we have an outbreak? So that makes also, yeah, there is a lot of different stakeholders that are important, and yeah, that makes it also important to think about good control measures. No, I have to see. So what we did in the Netherlands is looking at a good contingency plan, and I think that's the basis for control, to make sure that you're prepared. And yeah, the transmission, we did a lot of transmission studies, and it was the basic for our modeling. And one of my things that I always say, foot-and-mouth disease is not highly contagious. Otherwise, why do we have topotypes in different regions? Then it would spread easily around the world, like corona. So it's not as contagious. But some of the things we discussed yesterday at the modeling session, if you have late detection, you have large outbreaks, and perhaps in a larger region, like if you look at avian flu now in the USA. So contingency planning is essential, and that also is important, I think. So that, yeah, it's difficult to say what is the position of free countries. We have just addressed some of those issues with our contingency plan on one hand, and on the other hand, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, it's well organized, so why bother? So that's hey, that's the next one. Okay.
Thank you, Aldo, for being so comprehensive and really on time. Now we can move to Southeast Asia, and it's my pleasure to invite Vilma.
Morning, everyone. I'm Vilna Vosloo from the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness, and I'm here this morning to give a little bit of an overview of foot-and-mouth disease in Southeast Asia. And the reason I'm presenting it is because we quite often at these meetings don't have a very well representation of especially the endemic countries in Southeast Asia attending. And I'm afraid that sometimes it may leave the impression that not much is happening there in terms of foot-and-mouth disease control, but indeed there's a lot of regional activities going on. So it's a very complex situation, with foot-and-mouth disease being endemic in most of the Southeast Asian countries. And although it's seen as one big region, there are epidemiological differences between the different countries. And a lot of this is not well understood at all. One of the biggest attributing factors to foot-and-mouth disease in the region is the complex animal movement that is occurring, and that is largely driven by trade. And it's quite often difficult for the veterinary community to understand what's going on because the trade patterns can change so quickly. What has made a real impact and difference to Southeast Asia was the establishment of the sub-regional office from the World Organization for Animal Health, WOA, that has been involved in the region since 1994. And it started off with a limited number of countries, and at the moment they have 12 Southeast Asian countries working together, as well as China and Mongolia. So together and with the sub-regional office, they have been working on these roadmaps of trying to control foot-and-mouth disease. And at the moment they are on their 4th roadmap, also with a lot of monitoring and evaluation to see how they are progressing against trying to control foot-and-mouth disease. Now, just a little bit more about the regional situation. So this is Pool 1, and for many years the situation was actually quite stable within Pool 1 in terms of the viruses that were circulating. So traditionally they had very specific O lineages occurring, but then in 2016, they had the introduction of the O India 2001E that basically displaced all the other circulating viruses. So for many years, most of the outbreaks that have been reported had been due to O India 2001, and that is indeed also the strain that had very recently spread to Indonesia, who had been free of foot-and-mouth disease for nearly 40 years. So a constantly evolving situation there. Now, for a while now, they didn't really report serotype A, but that has also started changing since 2020, when serotype A is slowly being re-emerging. And what has been observed in the past was that you can get these waves of a specific serotype or topotype or lineage going through and affecting the country, the region, displacing viruses, and then a new introduction may happen. So everyone is keeping an eye on these serotype A viruses that have emerged, because we don't really know how that is going to impact the virus evolution over time. Very interesting, Asia 1 has not been observed in the region since 2007, with only a single incursion in 2017 in Myanmar, which as far as we can tell has not spread. Now, this is just a little bit of an indication of where the outbreaks have been reported between 2020 and 2023. And I just want to acknowledge that all the information that I've gathered here was actually obtained from the sub-regional office's own website that they are maintaining through the WOA website, which anyone can access and go and have a look at a very interactive way of what is happening in the region. Now, the previous map showed you where the outbreaks had occurred. If we look at this particular sort of chart that we have here, the red is serotype O, the blue is serotype A. But what is of real concern is the pink and the orange. Orange being outbreaks that had not been sampled, so we know nothing about those. And pink are the ones where samples had been taken, but they could not be serotyped. So although we sort of put on maps that we have an idea of what's going on in the region, if one compares the amount of outbreaks that are not further investigated or compared to potentially those that are actually never even reported, we actually have an incredibly poor information around the situation there, which is of real big concern. So this is just showing sort of the evolution of the virus lineages, and I'm not going to go into detail, but again, please go onto the website. It's very useful. And this also just shows a little bit the change in the patterns of the serotype O lineages over time, with O India 2001 now being the most important strain. Now again, this indicates which species are mostly affected, and from this chart, it looks like cattle are the main species being affected. But again, this may be quite misleading because not all the outbreaks are fully investigated. We also know that there's a growing population of small ruminants in Southeast Asia, and we won't know what the impact of that will be on the sort of the epidemiology of foot-and-mouth disease in the future. Now, there is attempts to use vaccination as control method in Southeast Asia, but unfortunately, that's not always well coordinated between the countries. So different countries have different approaches to the use of vaccination. Some areas focus on what they have identified as areas of high risk, and they will focus their vaccination efforts there. There are some countries that have strategies of vaccinating animals before they are moved. There are also some bilateral agreements between countries now to import animals into countries where there's a great need. And a lot of this is based on having quarantine stations on the borders where animals are quarantined and vaccinated before they are moved across the borders. Again, in an attempt to try and prevent the spread of new lineages potentially across the region. In some cases, there's just emergency vaccination in the face of outbreaks, but there are also countries that have specific zones that they are focusing on to try and control the disease in specific areas. Excuse me, I brought a cold with me. So I have shown a lot of the challenges, and maybe just to summarize the challenges, there's quite often a lack of political support and funding to control the disease, and this is nothing new. I think we've heard a lot about that over the last 2 days as well. Foot-and-mouth disease having a low priority, competing with other endemic diseases, and also other priorities for governments. There's a growing demand for high-quality protein, and this is impacting on trade, and it's very hard for the veterinary services to follow those trade patterns. There is an increase in the susceptible livestock population, and also the changing national interests and political instability in the region. Added to that, there are several challenges regarding vaccination. There is demand for local production of foot-and-mouth disease vaccines, which quite often can bring in risk if these local production facilities are not run according to the best quality, funding constraint, and then the inefficient use of vaccines. But of course, it's not all doom and gloom, because within all these challenges, there are always areas where we can focus to try and make it better. So we know that there are similar challenges. So if you put your efforts together, we can work on this lack of the epidemiological understanding, We can work together to look at these rapidly changing trade patterns, try and motivate funders and politicians to invest in disease control and try and improve the vaccines and vaccine strategies. The strengths in the area, of course, are that despite sometimes a lack of political will, there are amazing people looking after foot-and-mouth disease in the area. So very motivated and dedicated veterinary services, researchers, scientists, and field workers, with several opportunities where the private sector can become much more involved, and not just the private sector sitting in the room here today, but also looking at public-private partnerships and getting the farming systems more involved, as well as looking at the standardization of vaccine requirements in the region. Thank you.
Okay, so we could hear great talks and on cost-benefit analysis, on global scenarios on 4 continents, and now it's the time to invite all the speakers to come here next to Georgina, so we can start the discussions. Melissa, Mariano, Vilna, and Taudo. Unfortunately, Simon is not with us. I would also like to invite Helen Nduku Mutua from Kenya, who is our panelist.
This microphone.
Are we missing a chair?
So we have place for everybody. Maybe before start, Helen can introduce quickly herself.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks to all the speakers for a really nice overview of the situation. Very different situation in different regions and different incentives and challenges in different regions. So now we want to invite the audience. Do you have any idea? What will be the starting point to start reconciling the different conflicting interests, maybe, like different challenges and incentive in the regions and in the different stakeholders? So, yeah.
Thank you very much. It's James Wood from the UK. I've really enjoyed the really diverse presentations this morning, and thank GFRA for putting on this excellent session. One of the things that we learned in the UK in 2001 was that there are substantial costs associated with the control of disease, which are unintended costs, and many of these are indirect. And one of the things that struck me with most of my work, not being on foot-and-mouth disease, but in the African continent, is that often we don't think about the unintended costs of some of the other policies that we apply globally. And although this was mentioned in the recorded presentation, I do wonder whether we should be thinking more about what the unintended costs of our control measures are. And market access was mentioned, but we think really just about the direct costs, and I think we should be thinking far more holistically, globally, about what the unintended costs of us having free zones in some parts of the world, which then present huge problems for many countries ever being able to gain market access because of, as laid out, if you have regions which have really severe civil war with massive forced movement, it makes disease control in animals effectively impossible. And this can then have major impacts around the regions. And I do think that we need to think more about what the what those overall impacts are on subsistence farming for some of the poorest farmers in the world, instead of just considering what the benefits are for those of us who are lucky enough to live in foot-and-mouth disease-free zones. I haven't really presented my case or question very well, but I hope you understand the gist of it. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Yeah, completely agree. And I would probably add the unintended consequences of control measures that a lot of time we forget about it, and some of the producers get more affected by the control measures than the disease itself. So it's probably something to keep in mind. Yeah, Susan?
Now, perhaps I should add something to that also we talk about cost, but we should also think about social consequences. And in the Netherlands, our control measures to become free were quite strict, not as strict as in the UK, where also the tourist industry was heavily had a huge consequence, perhaps even more than the farming industry. But we also had farmers that killed themselves, and that's also something you have to think about. It has a social impact, and that it's huge. So you have to think, and that's the reasons that contingency plans are so extremely important. Because if you don't have a contingency plan, you come up with ideas, and somebody will say, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea," and do something which is in hindsight not a good idea. And in a contingency plan, modeling outbreaks, you can really think about these things beforehand. But also contingency plans need to update it. Our contingency plan is now 20 years old. No, not 20, but almost. So that we have to think about it. Is in Europe there is new legislation, so what is it still fit for purpose? But contingency planning is important.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to agree with the previous speakers, especially for the social impacts. Over the last year, we had quite a number of outbreaks, and we had over 3/4 of the country under quarantines. And we went out there to speak with the farmers, and they had a lot of social impacts. There were delayed marriages because we need cattle to actually pay dowry for marriages. So there are some people who actually delayed having that, their marriages set out. So it was a very big concern. We also had impact on burials. People could not go for burial ceremonies because according to the rituals, you have to you have to slaughter animals, to have people attend these functions. So there was a lot of also psychological impact, like Aldo was saying. For us, having animals is very prestigious. So if you have animals that are sick, and the stigma that comes along with having sick animals. So I think also those impacts, not only the economic impacts, but also the social impacts have to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, it's another one here.
Okay, thank you. Well respected Congress. Abubakar is the name from Nigeria. Thank you, GFRA, for the work done so far, and the speakers for very excellent presentations. Currently, Nigeria is faced with intermittent outbreaks of FMD, and it's quite interesting because Nigeria, with 6 geopolitical zones divided into 2 hemispheres, the north and the south. Over 80% of the livestock are resident in the northern part of the country. However, the northern part of the country is arid. Hence, livestock needs to move sometimes over 1,500 kilometers by foot by the owners down south in search of pasture. These same locations where well over 80% of livestock are being held are currently being ravaged by insurgencies and banditry. Over 90% of Nigerian livestock are resident in the hands of rural farmers, especially women and children, serving as major sources of livelihoods and income. In relation to the UN's SDGs goals 1 and 2, enhancing zero poverty and zero hunger, livestock plays a critical role in the hands of these rural women. However, researchers currently are lacking in key areas of livestock development that are resistant or less susceptible to foot and mouth disease virus. How then can we get help in areas of research is not just prevention, not just control, but we having animals that are less susceptible to foot and mouth disease virus. For example, studies have been done to show breed predisposition to FMD. Studies have also been done to show age predisposition to FMD. How can we get help in areas of research into genetic modification of animal breeds or investing in animal breeds, especially for the African continent, in animals that are less susceptible to FMD? Thank you.
Thank you. So there's some question from someone else in the audience, but Keith in the...
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thanks to all the speakers. So short reflection, I think your narrative isn't really relevant to the biggest global issues of the day. Sorry if that sounds a bit hard. But if people are worried about climate change, and they come here, I think you had one reference that was probably in Melissa's talk to the impact. The great thing or bad thing about FMD is it does affect huge numbers of animals, and Melissa said that. So huge numbers, maybe half of the world's ruminant population at risk. So that's huge numbers, and when it comes to translating that into greenhouse gas emissions, which could be prevented by vaccination, by control, you're not still talking that language. So the climate funds, which are enormous, are not currently being remodeled to help control FMD in Nigeria and other places through vaccination. Why? Because we're not making that narrative. We're not connecting those things. And yet data exists, and probably the world's best scientists on FMD with that data are here. So think about connecting those two things. The other things are, what are the big animal health challenges? Antimicrobial resistance. Everyone who's been in the field with FMD has seen animals treated with antimicrobials. So connect your numbers of FMD, connect it with practices, and you find it's one of the big users of antimicrobials, and yet you're not talking about that. So I say that as someone, if you're going to be relevant to the big issues that are driving political changes, you've got to bring in those languages as well as economics and development. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, very good reflection.
Now, I think that's a very good point, that we have to make sure that FMD outbreaks are relevant. But if I look at history, I started with history. We reported in 1936, I think, 100,000 outbreaks in the Netherlands. That means that every farmer that saw clinical disease went to the mayor and said, I had clinical disease. And it was recorded, and it was... If I look at endemic countries, there is no country that records this number of infectious disease. Also, South America did the same. In the 90s, you had these maps of South America with all the outbreaks recorded, and no one was blamed. If we want to make foot and mouth disease control important, we have to record every outbreak to show to our own government that there is an issue and that it matters. If we hide outbreaks and we do not report them, and we say, oh yeah, only we are endemic and we had two outbreaks last year, then nobody is going to make a big change. And even if we link it to global warming and the global UN development goals, then nobody sees that it's important. We have to start reporting. And that's a big issue which I think has also failed in our PCP approach, that we didn't do the simple things we did 80 years ago and made it relevant to our government to start research on foot and mouth disease. It was, or even 120 years ago, when Lafleur and Voss started research. They didn't get money because nobody thought it was not important. No, they got money to start a lab for research because people thought it was important. And that's only possible if you record outbreaks.
Okay, thanks, Aldo. So we have a comment at the back, one here, and one, and
okay.
Let's
Thank
start.
you for the floor. I have two comments. One one is, I think the colleague from Nigeria talked about something very important, like proposing investing in breeds that are already acknowledged like being resistant to foot and mouth disease. So here I think we always have, like we are in a kind of a dilemma, because most of the time when a breed is resistant to disease, at the same time it may be less productive in terms of like milk production, meat, and so on. And when we know that cattle production is mainly done for economic purposes, so when a breed is, yes, resistant, but it's not like helping people to, we are in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, so like fighting hunger all over the world. So if they cannot help our communities to fight hunger and poverty, even if they resist against FMD, we will not be maybe contributing to the attainment of the SDGs. So I think we should consider that side as well. Secondly, my second comment is about what my colleague from Kenya said, and here I was very happy seeing her, like stressing on the socio-economic and impact of foot and mouth disease in Kenya. And here I would like even to go further, saying that given the social cultural value of cattle in our culture, in the Eastern African community, because I come from Congo, and Congo is part of the East African community together with Kenya. So Congo is a country that like almost entirely relies on cattle importation, and Kenya is one of our main providers. So when it comes to an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Kenya, the social and economic impacts reaches far beyond the borders of Kenya. So Congo is one of the affected areas when it comes to an outbreak in Kenya. So I think it is very important to act in this region, because if we find a solution and help communities to develop their resilience to this problem, would have helped almost the whole Eastern African community region. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move to the opinion of one of the industry partners.
Good morning to everybody. First of all, congratulations to South America for successfully able to control the foot and mouth disease vaccine, foot and mouth disease. I would like to know, if I understood correctly, you were mentioning about regarding the testing of the vaccine. I mean, it is vaccinated, and then 3 months later you collect the post-vaccinated sample. That is what has been used for analyzing the quality control of the vaccines, or how it is? And can you elaborate a bit on it?
I didn't get the question.
Maria, yeah.
Sorry, neither did I.
Yeah.
I was distracted by the
Okay, so, exactly what is the question? No, the in vivo challenge is mandatory for all the new registered vaccines. Then the further batches of the same vaccine are controlled by serology. For that, we have been building for decades. Correlates between seroneutralizing titers and liquid phase blocking ELISA titers with protection. So there are some standardized cutoff levels for each of the strains that are used in the vaccine. So we don't have to do a challenge every time, an in vivo challenge every time, but this correlation has been made between the results of a challenge at 90 days and the serological titers at 60 days. So the new series of the same vaccine are just tested by serology 60 days after a single vaccination. And then the challenge is after a single vaccination, 90 days.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ellen from Kenya. Yeah. And FMD is endemic in Kenya. And one of the reasons for controlling FMD in Kenya is to facilitate access to markets for livestock products, and inputs and services. And this is done by creating disease-free zones. And when our government has arranged on creating these disease-free zones, and also this has been able to promote local, regional, and international markets. I was giving these reasons due to my colleague from Congo. Yeah, we do exports of our products to Congo. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. So, Kira, at the front, please.
Yes, I just wanted to echo to what was said on socio impact. I remember there was a very comprehensive publication, peer-reviewed by Martin Barasa, a Kenyan guy in South Sudan, and the cost-benefit ratio was much higher than we expected, between 13 and 17. So $1 invested in FMD control could save $17. It's amazing, and we are speaking in very endemic, very pastoralist area.
Okay, thank you for the call. Yeah, I think there's been few cost-benefit analysis with different results in different areas. I don't know, Melissa, you want to comment on it?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'd also like to go back to Aldo's comment about the reporting, and I acknowledge that, yeah, certainly reporting can be important to understand the extent of the disease, but there's also a lot of barriers to reporting. Like we heard about the impacts of the control measures, and we've heard people, yesterday in the workshop saying, if a livestock owner is afraid of the consequences of reporting, well, then they're not going to report. And we heard also in the open session about behavior change and the science of behavior change. And so I think maybe there's room, in the research community to look at these social sciences and to bring them in a bit more to help us, work through these tensions about different perspectives and different motivations. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. So we have Pascal here, and then in the middle. Go first. Ah, okay.
Yeah, my name is Danny Govert. I have a question for Mariano. If I remember correctly, you showed the table in your presentation showing the numbers of farms that were tested and also the numbers of samples to check for circulation of the virus. And I think I saw that if you look to Brazil for 2022 and comparing 2022 and 2023, there was a drastic decline in the number of samples that was testing. And I find that a little bit worrying, knowing that the decision has been taken to stop vaccination in Brazil. I would actually expect the opposite, that if you stop vaccination, you should put more emphasis on your control program. So could you maybe comment on that? Or?
No. No, yeah, to me it also was kind of surprising. I must say I had to, that is Panaftosa. I couldn't find an alternative source for this, but to me it was quite surprising. Yeah, the idea is what you said, that it should be enhanced at least just before you will suspend vaccination.
That's the best part in statistics, isn't it? As the prevalence drops,
the number of samples that you need to collect also drops. So that's the statistics part. Thank you.
And passive surveillance becomes much easier if you do not vaccinate. So why take laboratory samples if passive surveillance increases enormously?
Pascal?
Just a short comment
sorry.
regarding Brazil. In our opinion, because we are familiarized with the market in Brazil, in many areas, they see the cattle when they take the cattle for vaccination. Stopping vaccination make a paradoxic negative effect. They are not in contact with the animals because they don't take the animal twice a year to vaccinate. So they lost the observation on the animals. And this is a negative impact on stopping vaccination.
Thank you. Here, then is one in the middle, and then is Chris.
And Pascal.
Pascal first.
Yeah. Just maybe a question for Wilna. It's when you think about countries' motivations to control FMD, it really depends. Take the example of Botswana, for example, when they had the big outbreak 40 years ago, really they wanted to control FMD because of food security. And then progressively they realized they could do free zones and then export, and there's a great trade incentive. But now to Indonesia, which was an FMD-free country, they had a big outbreak. Their initial motivation to control it was really high. They bought good vaccines, started vaccination, great reporting. But then lately, it seems like their motivation has dropped. Less reporting, and so I'm wondering, do you have any insights into Indonesia's situation and their motivation to control it or not?
I think actually Jeff would be better placed to answer that specifically for Indonesia because he's been working there a bit more than I have, and I see his hands up. So yeah.
Chris?
Rescue.
Okay. Thanks. Jeff Hammond. I've been working in Indonesia now for almost 2 years on behalf of the Australian government. Originally, as Pascal said, there was a huge move to purchase vaccine from anywhere and everywhere in the world, including the major manufacturers, but also some small-scale manufacturers. Unfortunately, over the period of the 2 years since the virus has now become endemic, the government's priorities have changed. And it's what we hear all the time and what we've heard from this meeting all the way through. There needs to be a political will at the top to manufacture the interest downwards to vaccinate against FMD and also to have a proper plan for control. The vaccination scheme was random because it's a number of islands, and the different vaccines from different companies were used in different places. So there's been no real ability to follow up the vaccination control effect in Indonesia. And unfortunately now, they've just had a presidential election, there's a new leadership campaign in Indonesia, and there is no budget for the Ministry of Agriculture. So there's a combination of factors, but mainly it's coming down to money and political will, where the vaccination of cattle in Indonesia is really falling off. And there's a great concern that they'll be back to almost square one in another year if that doesn't pick up. So at the moment, with Australian support, with other agency support, there's some control measures still in place, but mostly it comes down to the government's will to be concentrating on other issues in Indonesia.
Thank you for...
Added to that, of course, they're dealing with a lumpy skin disease outbreak as well, so there's also sort of competing interests there.
Indonesia at the moment is a one-stop shop. You have African swine fever, lumpy skin disease. There's concern about HPAI and foot and mouth disease. And the only vaccine for LSD has been donated, as far as I know. And so it's, again, it's a big issue for a country such as Indonesia, which is quite high-tech. And it's very aware, but it doesn't have that political will going downwards. And I think that's a critical issue. We've discussed, the PCP, how to make it work. There's got to be a driver from above for that to be happening, and below. So it's got to meet both ways. You have to persuade the producers that it's useful to do so.
Thank you. That's a very good insight and very good point about the different diseases going on. And I think that's a common theme in a lot of countries, that it's not just one disease going on. Yeah. Chris?
Chris Bartels, Animal Health Works. Hearing the different voices from the different continents and following up on the comment given by Keith, I'm interested to learn from South Africa. What can you explain or inform African and Asian
South America.
continents?
You mean South America?
Yeah, South
Ah,
America.
you say, no, I understood as South Africa.
Oh, sorry. South America.
Yeah, second time. Yeah.
Good. Corrected by this. What can you inform Asia and Africa on the approach to have a continental control of FMD? Because that's we hear here. There's a lot of if it is only by country, it will not move on. And I understand that there was a great drive by export, meat export. But is that the only narrative? And would that still apply these days if you have to start again? And that's where I refer to Keith's comments that these days financial is not the only part. It's also those other issues, environmental and social issues. That's also what Melissa explained in the overview of the indirect and direct costs.
Yeah, I think that we need to include that in the narrative, as you mentioned and as Keith mentioned. Usually, because of production matrix in South America, they are the most prominent issue is the exports and the production of meat. But actually, I remember for the outbreaks in 2001, I think that the only estimation of damage in the Argentinian economy was based on the markets that were closed after that, and it was something like $1,700 million, but that was just for direct cost. So that is not included, and it probably should be. In South America, as you may know, there are organizations that get together most of the countries of South America, and there's a regional plan, the PEFA, that has been carried out for many, many years, and it has different stages. This one is apparently the last one. But I believe that it's impossible to get a success in a region if you don't coordinate actions among countries. Even if you discuss, because we don't have always the same position as the rest of the countries, or the rest of the countries, they differ from Argentina or whatever. But at the end, you need to have points in common, and that is crucial in terms of what kind of vaccine do you want to apply, especially because there are countries that produce vaccines and they sell vaccines to other countries that they don't. Uruguay controls with vaccination and they don't produce vaccines. They buy all the vaccines to different countries, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil at the time. Now I don't know what they want to do. But to me, it's crucial, of course, to have spaces where all the countries are represented and they can discuss and get into agreements. And, of course, the weight of every country is different. What Brazil says has a different weight than, I don't know, Bolivia, for example. So, yeah.
So, Mariano, one thing that I can maybe just ask you as well, what's always seemed very evident to me was the very strong involvement of the industries in that plan. It wasn't just a government plan. The industries were very strongly involved and a big driver.
Yeah.
Sure. Just one thing. That really was evident after the outbreaks in 2001.
Okay, just one comment here at the front.
Yeah.
I just want to say the same thing. It was very important in South America, the farmers, how they participate together, and they had a strong influence in the government to agree in the programs to control and eradicate FMD. Because, of course, the main driver was the impact on exports, but internal markets also are impacted by outbreak of FMD, so they were very sensitive about that. They learned they need to deal with this, and that was one of the main drivers that unify the task in South America to control FMD, the farmer associations.
Yeah. Thank you. And then in the middle, finally.
Thank you very much for giving me the words. Thank you for the presentation. It's been very, very interesting. I mean, it's very interesting to see the different risk perspectives in different areas depending on the situation. I'm speaking from the point of view of a country that is Spain, and we are traders, so we need to sell our products outside, and I would like to raise a problem that is outstanding, and is the international, speaking about the vaccination and the decision-making of vaccination, mainly preventive vaccination, just to keep the vaccinated animals alive in a previously free country. This is still a big problem for countries to maintain these vaccination areas, because even without vaccination, third countries, I'm not speaking about names, that know perfectly the system in place regarding surveillance, control measure, contingency. Most of these third countries know better the Spanish system than that we do. And even in that situation, when a disease comes into a free country like Spain, the reaction of the market of the third countries is very slow. And international organizations like WOHA has improved this by reducing the time from 6 months to 12 months, but you have to comply with a list of requirements that is taking you more than 3 months. So the gaining is nothing. At the end, this is very important, because otherwise our first approach is to kill animals because it's the only option for us. But even so, we have examples. African swine fever in countries that they recover freedom and they are still closed by third countries 1 year, 2 years after this. So all these things should be internationally thought about, and some agreements should be reached. Otherwise, for a free country, it's impossible to say, I'm vaccinating, I'm avoiding the killing of the animals, because it's not, it's unsustainable for us.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very important point.
With the chair, can I make a comment?
Yeah, of course.
So I'm just a bit emotional here. We talk about the success of South America. What's the reason of that success? Have you thought about it? Culturally, they are similar. They're sort of similar language that's spoken within South America. They all understand each other. If they are put in the same room, they understand each other. Go to Southeast Asia. Each country has a different culture, different language, different religion. These are the driving factors for FMD control. Look for in case of Indonesia, when the outbreak happened in Indonesia, within few months there was a big festival. If the same outbreak would have happened few months earlier, they would have slaughtered the animals and gone into full slaughter mode. But they had the festival season coming up, and then it all through their scheme of things. So we need to think culturally as well, and you have to put all these countries in one place and make them to talk the same language. It's going to be very difficult. That's where the international bodies should rethink their strategies. Don't think of Europe when you talk to South and Southeast Asia. Don't talk about South American experience. See how you can harness their strengths. As Vilna said, there is a big, highly motivated veterinary services team, field staff, laboratory staff. If you're going to engage them now, you will have a future for those countries. If you're not going to engage them now, then it's going to be a bleak future. So please consider engaging those young minds in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. That's the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think, okay, we have one more comment, and I think that's the last one before we, and Alejandro. Sorry.
Thank you. This is Min Park from WOA. And I just wanted to maybe take this opportunity to make a clarification. and maybe update you also on the updates on the standard building process of WOA in terms of the FMD chapter. Some of you may already know that the FMD code chapter, that's the international standards for trade of FMD susceptible animals and other commodities. The last adoption was back in 2015. And since then, there had been ongoing a lot of discussion. It's the longest chapter in the code, and which also elicits a lot of reaction by many members, which is great, which shows engagement and interest. And after all those dialogues, just recently, last May, at the general session, a new chapter has been adopted. And some of those were mentioned, Hernan just mentioned about the reduction of the waiting period after an outbreak. And which, well, I hope it's not impossible to reach, because these are standards that have been circulated several times to members and with among experts and elected commission members to reach a consensus adoption. Of course, for any change, it takes time to implement, and also changing perceptions of from the usual practice. One of which is, in the past, for countries that are free without vaccination, officially recognized, it was prohibited to import vaccinated animals if you wanted to maintain your FMD free without vaccination status. That is no longer the case. The recently adopted chapter of the code now allows those vaccinated animals. Of course, there are provisions and to follow to make that safe trade, but it has been internationally agreed and adopted by the membership. So, I mean, I think now it's again, there are many members and you who are in very close contact with your veterinary services to go and start the implementation and start making that gradual change of perception, but still respecting the standards for safe international trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alejandra, maybe the... Okay. Yeah. Manur?
Thank you. Madhur Dhingra from FAO. I've been listening to the discussions, and I think there are sort of two groups of countries in this room. One is the countries who want to trade. Some of them are free. Some of them aspire to trade. And the other group of countries are the ones who really want to, support livelihoods and make sure their farmers have healthy livestock. Yeah. Now, common to both of these groups of countries is the regional dimension. Yeah. In one group of country, we see that it's the big push and the leadership from the region that has led to the success of South America. So now I'm wondering and asking the panel, what do you think these other groups of countries should do? And what should their regional groupings do? Or what is the incentive for them that they should be looking at where, there's no imminent prospect of trade? So what's their driver and their motivation to support their countries to harmonize what they do, to manage cross-border trade? And what's your opinion on that?
If I can maybe jump in on that one. From Southeast Asia, what we've seen is that regional trade is actually quite a strong driver. So not so much trading outside the region, but to be able to trade within the region and utilize sort of the market opportunities that are in other countries. Part of these sort of bilateral agreements to have quarantine stations and plans in place of how to trade animals, but within the region, is quite a strong incentive.
And then a follow-up question. You say bilateral agreements, but really the issue is more multilateral. Yeah? The risk is more multilateral. Yeah.
But
and it's the movements are not just for FMD. So a question to the room, does this need to be broadened beyond FMD? because it's FMD, it's LSD, it's CBPP, it's all of that, and maybe would that bring in the added incentive?
And I think that's, so yeah, at the moment it's small, but it actually acts at, it's like little pilot projects to see how well that can work. So the idea would be to try and see if that can be broadened. Yeah. So it's definitely a space to watch. I'm definitely watching it with interest to see how that could facilitate trade within a region.
And if I can just comment on it, I think something it's a point probably to put to everybody. But a lot of countries that want, like, their vision is to export and want to control FMD, but there are a lot of other diseases that wouldn't allow them to export, even if they control FMD. So should the control program be more integrated in a lot of the TATs, which potentially can be more cost-effective at the same time if we control more than one. So it's probably something to think about it along with the multilateral, and there is no border for these diseases. So.
Just to add that we in GFTADS are definitely thinking about it, because I think even there's not a lot of appetite for this single disease by disease approach as well.
Thank you. Was it another?
Perhaps I think that's a good point, and I think I support also what Nagendra said about you have to have a regional approach. Like in Europe, we have the European Union, which is a regional approach. I think 80–90% of our products are sold within the European Union. We have a high standard, but you could envision that you could have the same regional approach, and accepting that animals have been ill and that products can still be sold with safe and that safe commodities are. But that's also things that we should think about. On the other hand, we should also think about that we should not push only for animal protein, because if you look at the whole global situation, plant protein is perhaps the best option for the future. So we should also think about that. Can we think about managing animal husbandry with plant protein production, and because you need manure, you need and we should integrate it even beyond only animals, I think.
Any other comment? Yeah. If not, I can close it. Alejandra.
Just one comment that comes from what he says. I totally agree we need to integrate FMD control on a global agenda, definitely, and that we need to change the narrative of how we explain why we are controlling this disease. But the difficult part, I think, is how to position that agenda, particularly in the endemic countries. What can we do from our research area to position that agenda and to make the narrative that can be translated into research that support all this? Because I think it will be very difficult to change. We needed to change the mindset. It's easier for a poor country to explain things in terms of costs only, because there are urgencies and there are other needs. But I think we need to work really hard to do that. And also within the same framework, a question perhaps to the audience is, do we really need to stop vaccination in places where vaccination is working, and they use vaccination to also add other vaccines, for example, like Brucella and others that are applied together? Is that really needed? Is that something that if the country is happy in doing that and everything is working, and you stop, and then you have an outbreak, and then you don't have the capacity to produce the vaccines? Does that make sense? Also considering the global agenda, that you don't want the animals to get sick, and that's the whole point. So it's just an open question. I don't know if I get some hands up there. But yeah, what can we do also from research?
Thanks, Alejandra, for the comment. I think, in terms of research, one of the gaps, at least that I found in preparing for this study, was that we don't have estimates of the impacts of FMD on the greenhouse gas emissions and on the antimicrobial use. And I take your point that maybe that's not the main interests of the endemic countries who want to support livelihoods and food security. But this can be a driver for the international development, funds to flow it towards FMD control. And I had another point, but I don't remember. So
Take your time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll come
There's
back.
lots of other people. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alejandra, for that comment about the stopping vaccination being the undisputed end goal of a campaign. And that really got me thinking. I'm too young to have any firsthand memory of what was happening when Europe was stopping vaccination. But to my understanding, a large part of Europe wanting to stop was the recognition that it was so hard to safely produce and use inactivated vaccines, because they, all through the 80s, they were having these outbreaks that were very clearly associated with either vaccine production or vaccine use, improper inactivation, etc. And I think we've long moved past that. And I think today, inactivated vaccines, their production, their use is much safer than it was in the past. And I'm sure that that wasn't the only driver behind wanting to stop vaccination, but I would like to hear, is it different now? Do we still have this strong will and need to stop vaccination at some point? I don't know.
Okay, just Keith at the back.
Patrick and Patrick.
So maybe a few comments to them. I think we need to get away from that at all costs going to stop vaccination everywhere. Because, the whole system we have, and all you said, Europe is not Europe, nobody thinks about FMD. We're living in a global connected world. We heard about people not having access to markets, so that are the drivers why people want to stop vaccination at the moment, to get market access. But I think it's also quite dangerous if we just pushing everybody to achieve that at all costs, because looking at South America, for example, Brazil is stopping vaccination. Brazil is one of the biggest exporter of meat globally. So if just a scenario, and let's hope that it's never going to happen, but what if FMD enters Brazil in 2 years when there is no immunity anymore, when there is no vaccine manufacturer there? We heard yesterday about vaccine banks that are just now starting to be built up in South America. So there's a huge risk, and it has effects far beyond of just stopping vaccination. It's food security, it's climate impact if you need to kill all those animals or whatever you want to do. So there's much more behind that. And I ask myself if we need to think about new approaches. Should we not, instead of just saying if you're free without vaccination as the ultimate goal to trade, should we say, look, if you keep vaccination because you're an important supplier of meat, or you are in a region where there is still FMD around and it is dangerous to stop vaccination, should we actually pay them a surplus for keeping up vaccination? Would that be something also to help the other countries who are not at that stage to actually do control measures to help also Europe, other countries, America, to have not an incursion of the virus? Because diseases jump. We have seen that many, many times. Yeah.
So just a point of the importance that we of the how we present these discussions to the regulatory entities, so those that control, how the export is going to be managed in a situation as we are discussing now, the use of vaccines in a country that has been free of the disease for a long period of time. Because as scientists, we could just present data and we could present the arguments for the regulatory entities to re-examine their regulations in terms of the export. But we need to have them sitting in the same room where we could present this data, and I think that's probably what is lacking. I think it's a good consensus here that there are some equal perception or intention that countries that are still vaccinating, and I think there is a good outcome of maintaining that for a long period of time. But if the regulatory said no, there is no options to consider completely free, we have a problem. So the point would be, can we just increase these discussions, having those that are in the regulatory sector sitting around and being exposed to these discussions?
Thank you. Yeah, Kit on the back.
Thank you. I try to answer Alejandra's question. What can the research community do that would be really sort of helpful to move the narrative on? And I think you're in a very good position, many of you, to be able to take some of those things forward. So when we mention greenhouse gases and FMD, this is not another high-income country kind of argument. You know, this is all of the countries need to look at their national determined contributions to greenhouse gases. So that's every country. So your ministers have got to go to meetings and report on what the plans are. So where do they include in those plans the contribution of FMD control, ruminant health, to reducing greenhouse gases? They don't at the moment, because sometimes the research community in those countries hasn't connected its estimates of prevalence, the impacts on production, and greenhouse gas. And there's people who could help you do that. And you are the guys in those countries that can actually put those things together. Those of you professors with master's students, do a simple study on antimicrobials, how often they're used after, social attitudes to using antimicrobials after FMD, then you have an estimate. And then the same, or other ministers who go to meetings who have to report on what the country is doing on its plan for antimicrobials. You've got some data. Most of the countries have got fora to talk about how you reduce the use of antimicrobials. Where are your lab techs and the people who know about FMD at those meetings where they talk about, if you control FMD, you also reduce antimicrobials. So connect your research into those local agendas, connect the data you can produce to your ministers so that they can talk about why to control FMD.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. So I think, well, thanks everybody for very rich discussion. I think we're touching in a lot of points. We can probably say that FMD is not an isolated issue. We have to see it as in a complex system, as part of something that is involved in many other factors. So just start thinking about it, start having these conversations with different actors. I think it is very important and a very good starting point. So that from here we can just start collaborating and moving on and start thinking in a different way. So thank you very much for all the presenters and for everybody putting comments, questions, queries. I think it's a good. So now we have a coffee break and back at what time? 15 minutes. Back in 15 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good luck.